Hi, I'm David Berlin, editor-in-chief of ProgrammableWeb, and welcome to another Developers Rock podcast, which will be featured on both ProgrammableWeb.com as well as YouTube. And today, my guest is Jason Bonds from Ping Identity. Jason, what is it you do at Ping?
Yeah, hey, David, pleasure. So I'm the general manager of the Ping Intelligence business unit.
Okay, what does that mean? What does that business unit do?
Yeah, a great question. So as most people know, Ping Intelligence grew up traditionally an identity and access management company. Over the years, we've gotten truly into security and cybersecurity. And the play we're making these days is around leveraging intelligence. So things like AI and ML, aggregation of scores and different things to provide both intelligence to APIs, which I think we'll specifically talk about today, but as you'll see in the near future, things like identities, data, and devices as well, to really bring a full broad spectrum set of security and identity and access controls to the enterprise.
So digital security is just like, it's making all the major headlines today because so many companies are having these infiltrations and exfiltrations of data, a lot of sensitive information getting out there. Just go into a little brief description of how challenging is it? What are the problems that are truly facing organizations today that they didn't have to deal with before?
Yeah, well, I think there's a few things that really provide some challenges for organizations. First and foremost, you got to keep the lights on. So a lot of the investment and the resources go to just dealing with keeping existing applications and systems, running and up to date. And then on top, you've got the growth of things like, the API economy. And as you very well know, and the audience here knows, APIs are essentially, out of control. And Gartner will tell you that by 2020, they'll be the largest attack vector that bad actors go after. So I think it's a little bit of a reactive posture by most enterprises when we go out and talk to them, that they're just trying to keep their heads above water and then react to specific problems that they face. And a lot of it, security, unfortunately, whether it's with APIs or other systems, is not getting the funding and the resources that they truly need to really help protect and defend an enterprise.
Well, what are the threats? Like, how are they different today than they were before? Because we've been dealing with digital security problems for forever. How does the use of APIs, I guess, for example, change the nature of the threat?
Yeah, so the nature of the threat is interesting. So we're actually seeing that there's actually more misuses and abuses. In other words, actors with valid credentials getting access to systems and just doing the wrong things in a lot of cases, not necessarily meant to do something negative or in a bad way, but just misusing a system. So a developer develops an API that gives people access to some collection of data or some proprietary algorithm or something, and they're leveraging that thing kind of above and beyond the use. So because APIs are so you obfuscate and it's so decoupled of an implementation, that we're finding that both the bad actors are doing everything they can to get access to that data. One, because APIs of old where, hey, tell me the location of XYZ companies, different stores, and, a little bit about their product catalog. Today, it's, customer information, credit card information, all kinds of proprietary details, about different individuals or pieces of data that are just sensitive. And so the bad actors are going after them. And at the same time, we're having to expose more of this stuff to partners and internals, and they're either misusing it or abusing it in many cases. So you're not just protecting, if you will, your four walls. You're having to protect from within.
So there's an internal threat. What percentage of, if I don't know if you know this or not, like what percentage of the problems that have surfaced over the years, in the headlines and stuff, came as a result of some internal threat versus some sort of external threat?
Yeah, don't quote me on an exact percentage, but I would say it's well over half of the the ones that I would say the audience here would have heard of, recently, those big names that you hear like a Facebook or a T-Mobile or Panera Bread or others that have publicized some bad activities. But if you kind of aggregate over the last year and a half, we would say well over half of the experiences we have. And in fact, I was on a call this morning with a Ping customer, and they were saying that they are seeing it closer to 70% of the bad actions taken against their APIs are actually by good actors.
Wow. So and are those just mistakes?
Yeah, they're mistakes, or the developer didn't properly scope the API in a lot of the cases. So they thought they had kind of brought it down to what was the needed functionality, but maybe they opened it up a little bit just because and so they didn't apply the right OAuth token scopes to it or something. And a good actor goes in there and says, hey, I need this, but boy, I could also use this data over here that I actually have access to, so I'll just use it, right? So it's not necessarily they want to do it for bad purposes, to go sell it on the dark web and then bribe you to pay money, so that they won't expose that data. It's sometimes it's just people don't know better on the internal side. Other times it is a bad action of an employee that's disgruntled or maybe just looking for trouble, so to speak. And so we see a little bit of both, but most of the time it's not necessarily meant to be malicious. And so we definitely still see that on the outside all the time, but from the internal use, it's typically not a malicious, it's more of an abuse or an accident.
Okay, so it's a brave new world out there. And what is it that Ping does to make it easier for Ping's customers to address the problem, keep a lid on things, so to say?
Yeah, so we're kind of augmenting the traditional capabilities that most organizations have today. So most people will have an ADC or CDN, some WAF technology. They'll have a bot detection capability in front of some of their web login forms, and they'll have typically some sort of an API gateway managing the API's lifecycle and doing some basic security like validating OAuth tokens and rate limiting and those types of things. But what Ping's bringing to the table is essentially the ability to find the anomalous behavior. So looking at an individual API's historical behavior through its metadata and building through leveraging AI and ML technologies to understand what an API's behavior should be. And when we find anomalies, we're going to bubble those up. So, you might have a good actor make it through all those systems, but they're using it in a way that detects as an anomaly. That's why we'll find those internal misuses as an example, as well as things like API takeovers, where somebody does present a valid OAuth token that they've hijacked, and they come in and they take over an API and start doing something different with it, where they've reverse engineered it. And now we're accessing different components and systems. And so we're seeing that, those types of attacks leveraging our AI modeling, because it's done on an API basis, is able to detect and find those, needles in a haystack, I like to call them.
So, artificial intelligence is starting to sound like the cure to everything that ails an organization or even an individual. More recently, we've seen other companies come out and talk about how their security solutions are AI-driven. So how is Ping's AI different from, let's say, any competitors that are claiming to do the same thing?
Great question. I would say our AI is probably not that much different. It's how we apply it, right? So the fact that we are looking at things on an API by API basis and leveraging that to make a point in time decision, but to make models. So I think a lot of model it and then look at the behavior over time to then make inferences about specific pieces of data or instances in time. And I think what happens with a lot of the folks out there that are doing AI security, so to speak, they're leveraging the AI to look at an individual transaction in a point in time and make a decision about its specific data that it presents. So whatever the metadata is about that individual call, they're not leveraging it to look at models over time, or they're also looking at the API traffic through the entire gateway as an example. So if you have thousands of APIs that are deployed on a gateway, they're leveraging that technology to sift through all the data and not break it down on an API by API basis, which is easier, right? But to get to the true root of the problem and find those anomalies, you need to be able to look at the data on an API by API basis.
Now, what's the solution called?
So the solution, I haven't brought it up yet. Thanks for asking. It's Ping Intelligence for APIs.
Okay, Ping Intelligence for APIs. When it spots an anomaly, what happens?
So a couple things can happen. If the traffic's running through our product directly, we can determine to block it, send them an error page, reroute them somewhere, destroy an OAuth token, send them to if it's some kind of a user flow that we could re-authenticate them and revalidate them, we'll do that. If it's running through one of the gateways and we're working what we call a sideband mode, an integrated mode, where they're essentially sending us the metadata about each and every call, we can respond back to them and tell them that, hey, we believe this is not a valid call. We can send back an OK or a 403. And when they get that 403, they can decide to do some of those things I just described, or they can let it through and say, we'll deal with this in a postmortem fashion. So depending on the type of transaction it is, some organizations will say, we want to know about it and get visibility into it, but we don't necessarily want to stop it just in case there is a false positive, which when you're in the AI world, false positives do happen. So that's why training the models and doing things in advance to build up the data sets is so important to our product set.
Is training something that's constantly ongoing as you use the product? Like, like You train it maybe for some period of time, I don't know, 3-4 weeks, set it loose on the traffic, but then you'll see some sort of false positive rate. But meanwhile, you're constantly retraining it and saying, no, 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 that was not a false positive. That, that was, I'm sorry, that it was a false positive. Don't flag that. And a year later, things are much more secure than they were when you started maybe in the first 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. So our training kind of runs, you can kind of run it on a floating slice of time, right? And so we do a few things. One, we tell people you can train in a non-production environment and actually migrate that training data over into your production environment when you turn that API on in production, so that you have a nice set to start with. Or you can run in an unsupervised mode and let it train for a period of time, and then we've got a few knobs, if you will, that you can tune to allow the tuning to kind of look at it in a few dimensions to say, hey, we need to kind of loosen this up so we're not getting so many false positives, or we need to tighten it up because we're not getting any, which would be really scary, right? So because we know they're out there. And so, we give you a few different ways to do that, both, kind of ongoing. You're always rebuilding the model, but as a starting point, you can train and then upload that data, or you can just, go in an unsupervised mode right away. So there's a variety of things you can do. And then, of course, it's integrated with, all your major players out there, whether it's a Splunk or a QRadar or any of the other DevOps, SecOps type tools, so that those folks have visibility from the kind of flashing red light, green lights to go look at what's going on and correlate it with other things in the environment.
And if, let's say, I'm currently using some sort of API management system, out there, does this work with all of them? Can I just plug it right in, or does it only work with some and not others?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we can work with all of them. There's really two kind of possibilities. One is where we just sit either in front of or behind the API gateways, right? It kind of would be the typical pattern if we're running what we call inline. And so we work with all of them at that point. Our product kind of will look to the traffic as a transparent reverse proxy to wherever it's coming from and going to, right? And then secondly is that sideband mode I mentioned earlier. So we do have integrations already with most of the major gateways out there today, and we're building kind of the rest of that top 10, 15 list right now. And so, by the end of March, we expect to have the majority of the top 10 largest gateway players, with a few more to come in the next few months.
Scary that there's such thing as a top 10 in this marketplace, but I suppose you're right.
Yeah, in the API gateway world, there is quite a few. It's surprising.
Yeah.
I find a new one about every 1 or 2 weeks now that I've never heard of.
Yeah, I likewise, I get emails all the time, and I'm like, boy, I've never heard of these guys, and they say they're the leader in the market, and I'm like, wow, how could they be? I've never heard of them. I've been doing this for a long time. What other problems do you solve in addition to just securing the API traffic? I imagine there are organizations out there that have all kinds of challenges, compliance, for example. Do you address any of those?
Yeah, absolutely. So we very much so help with compliance. So an audit type capabilities, that post-mortem forensic capable visibility that we provide. So because we're looking at the models on an API by API basis and leveraging every data call to figure out and build and rebuild the models, we have that data available to us. So most folks, most of the other products that people would have in their API world are not going to store and have that large data set available to them. I mean, this is a big data problem at the end of the day. And so you're going to be able to refer to that and go back and look at it and say, here's where these people accessed this from, where they were going, what else they did with this session cookie or from this IP address. And so we see a lot of people actually almost more valuable to them above and beyond blocking, believe it or not, and protecting their APIs is the visibility they get into what's going on, both while it's happening and in a post-mortem fashion. So compliance is huge, along with the audit folks. And then just people just really don't know what they don't know, and they just kind of let things happen. And this is going to provide them a much more detailed level. And it is funny how many people say it's not going to happen to us. And our experience is we put this thing into people's environments, and very quickly you see, of course, you find those needles in a haystack, those anomalies.
Yeah.
People are like, I don't know what that is and why that's coming from there. And then the other thing, which we haven't talked about, is we actually, above and beyond doing the AI with our Ping Intelligence for APIs product, we provide a deception or honeypotting capability. And so that's really interesting, is we can expose an API to the public, and it'll look, and we name it something very similar to everything else. And then very quickly, something on the internet starts calling it, and we very quickly throw those things into our blacklist. We grab about 4 pieces of data about that call, whoever's that client, and we stick that into the blacklist. And if they go to try to actually hit real system APIs, we can block those immediately without even having to model. So we're leveraging both AI and honeypotting to provide security, but again, also visibility and just to who's hitting what.
And does the honeypotting work across your customers? So if you catch somebody trying to infiltrate one customer and you know they're a bad actor, you apply that, you let your other customers know or somehow get that information into their systems?
Yeah, not today. We are looking at some sort of a shared service that we're road mapping and kind of trying to figure out the feasibility of how that would actually operationalize. But
Crowdsourced security, if you want to call it that.
yeah, right. I mean, I think absolutely we could definitely supply the API, the IP addresses for those callers of those APIs that we quarantine. We have some of the other components around, session cookies and tokens and things that we grab might be unique to an individual organization. So we are kind of working through that with some of our customers now to figure out exactly what we could share. The other thing is we also do import whitelist and blacklist from third parties. So if you do have some service that you're using today to get blacklist, as an example, we can leverage those, and we can also be exported to then share with those other services. So
there are third-party blacklist providers just for APIs?
Not necessarily just for APIs, but they provide more generically. These IP addresses are known to be for malicious offenders and those types of things, right? So,
right. Okay, I get that. Yeah. Okay. Well, one question that everybody's going to have is how much? How much do I have to pay to get this advanced artificial intelligent solution that will lock down my APIs and perhaps keep me out of the headlines, more importantly?
Sure. So we at Ping license the Ping Intelligence for API product on a transaction-based model on an annual subscription. So we've got different buckets that obviously grow with your transaction volumes, and so you can start for as little as around $75K a year, and even a little bit less maybe depending on your volumes, but typically I would say $75K is an annual subscription starting point for most of our customers. And obviously it grows from there when you start to get into the billions and billions of API calls. And so, so it's available, it's accessible, it's easy to start with. We have a cloud trial where you just need to install our agent to get going. And so we can show you, in advance and kind of, prove to you that there is this visibility and this capability that will help your organization, and we're willing to do that up front at no cost, and then work with you from there. So
so you have a try before you buy option. What if it's an on-prem solution?
Yeah, so our production solution is on-prem. We believe you're going to want to own that data, have that data lake, be able to look at it for other reasons, have your data scientists and your analysts own and have that data available to them. And because it is such a big data problem, we're working through what would be a viable cloud option for a production world, right, versus a trial world. And so it will be software on premise that they'll own or subscribe to, and be able to report on the number of transactions and to look at it from that perspective.
All right, great. Well, obviously, this work of securing people's API gateways and just their APIs in general is taking you all over the world. I see you're coming to us from a hotel room. Where are you right now?
I'm in San Francisco. I'm actually attending the IBM Think conference, as well as meeting with customers and prospects here this week in San Francisco.
Well, thanks very much, Jason. We wish you great luck in your travels. We've been speaking with Jason Bonds, General Manager of Ping Intelligence. They're describing how they use artificial intelligence to trap malicious API traffic and keep your API secure. Jason, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, David. Have a great rest of your day.
Okay, thank you too. I'm David Berlin, Editor-in-Chief of ProgrammableWeb, and this is the Developers Rock podcast. You have questions, concerns, comments, let us know. You can leave the comments underneath the video on our YouTube channel, or you can just write to us by going to ProgrammableWeb.com.